ties between the two nations have reached a new low owing to two incidents. One is, of course, a shocking incident in Brampton in Canada. A video has come to light which shows a 5-kilometer-long parade with a tableau of India's former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's assassination in 1984. Now, it should be noted that this float was celebrating the assassination of Indira Gandhi. The parade with the tableau was reportedly held by separatist Sikh groups. The High Commissioner for Canada in India, Cameron Mackay, has condemned this incident. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has also stated that this is not the first time that such an incident of its kind has taken place and that the government needs to take action as it's not good for ties between the two nations. The second matter is that of over 700 Indian students who are at risk of deportation after receiving fraudulent admission letters to Canadian institutions. Canadian authorities had issued deportation notices to these students, but that process has been temporarily paused. Let's also listen in to the reactions that have come in, starting with India's External Affairs Minister.
This float issue used, let me actually answer it, because I think there's a bigger issue involved. And the bigger issue involved is really the space that Canada has continuously and frankly to us, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. Because if you look at their history, I mean, you would imagine that they learn by the history and they wouldn't like to repeat that history.
Khalistan supporters in Canada have reached a new low with a despicable float in a recent Brampton parade. The float celebrated the assassination of Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi with her cutout in white sari soaked in blood and cutouts of her bodyguards turned killers brandishing and pointing guns. This is not what our country Canada stands for. Tolerating the glorification of violence and public promotion of hate goes against everything our country believes in. Khalistan supporters have crossed the line, and Canada should and must respond.
Certainly, this is a new nadir for the India-Canada relationship, but what will this mean, and is there any way forward? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective. I'm joined in by senior Canadian journalist Terry Milewski, who joins me live. Thank you, Terry, for joining in. This, of course, if we talk about the float celebrating the assassination of India's former Prime Minister, that too by Sikh extremists, while many in Canada may want to call it free speech instead of hate speech, what explains Canada's lackadaisical approach to Sikh radicals?
Canadian politicians have proved themselves to be absolute cowards. They are afraid to say anything because they think that they will lose votes of the extremists, which votes that they shouldn't be pursuing anyway, if they say anything about these obscene and grotesque displays of reverence for terrorist martyrs, so-called. And remember that this is only the latest example of this. It's been going on for 20 years. And it's been worse. Not just the killers of Indira Gandhi, but the Air India bomber, Talvinder Singh Parmar, who slaughtered 331 completely innocent civilians who had nothing to do with the struggle for Khalistan back in 1985, and the bombing of Air India 182. And there are many other examples where they, for example, have named the headquarters of their campaign for a referendum on Sikh independence after the same Parmar. So they've named their campaign after a man who is, in fact, Canada's worst ever mass murderer. So they are afraid, the politicians are afraid that if they say anything about displays like the one you described in Brampton recently, that they will be attacked, that they will lose votes, because the Khalistanis are the most mobilized and the most vocal.
All right. Terry, also, does the Modi government now need a broader diplomatic strategy to ensure a more effective way to address friction points, that too of the issue of separatism and Khalistan, and also study permits for Indian students? I'd also like to ask you, what do you make of the Canadian High Commissioner's statement?
Yes, I think that the Indian government, look, it's not, you're not coming to me for advice for the Indian government. They know better than I do what they want to do. But let me offer a couple of thoughts anyway. The first is that Indian politicians have traditionally been content to bang the table and say, why doesn't Canada crack down on this kind of thing? Lock them up. And they don't get what they want. Well, guess what? They need to, if you'll forgive me, grow up and smell the coffee. They need to wake up. There are no Western democracies on offer which are going to suspend and abolish the right of free speech. We see free speech as sacred. This isn't India. We are governed by Canadian law, UK law, German law, Australian law on free speech. It isn't to be swept away when it's convenient diplomatically. So Indian politicians need to be a bit more sophisticated about this and get something worthwhile. And I'll tell you what that is. They hold the whip hand. India is a more important country every day. Canada needs India more than the reverse. So let's set a price. Why doesn't India say to Canada, okay, you want access to the Indian market. You want free trade with India. We're not going to deal with any Canadian politician who fails to explicitly and publicly condemn such reverence and glorification for violence and intimidation. I draw your attention to the statement on this Brampton case by the Canadian High Commissioner in New Delhi. A very good man, name is Cameron McKay, and he made an excellent statement condemning this display. But in my humble opinion, he made a mistake in that statement. If you look carefully at it, he says there is no place in Canada for this kind of hate and glorification of violence. Well, what he should have said, to be correct, is that there should be no place in Canada for that.